Welcome to the sixth session of our IMPACTAbility learning series with our hosts Alan Mansky and Vicki Kamak. Today's session is titled Advocate with Empathy, and Alan and Vicki have invited their special guest Donna Thomson, author, parent, and caregiving advocate, to join them. This series focuses on the impactability of individuals in the disability movement. Alan and Vicki have discovered that people with disabilities and their families have a distinct talent for achieving impact as they are continuously inventing and creating their way out of adversity. We hope that today's discussion will invite you to explore solutions-based advocacy and what it means to advocate with empathy and improve your chances of advocacy success. I am your webinar moderator today. My name is Tim Ames, and I am the Executive Director of Plan and Plan Institute. I'm very proud of the teams that contribute so much to those who we support and partner with. Just to give you a bit of background, Plan Institute is a social enterprise whose main objectives are to improve the lives of people with disabilities by offering a suite of learning initiatives, advocating for policy reform, and collaborating on impact-based community projects. In fact, our focus on community impact led us to Tamarack Institute, one of the world's leading organizations in collective community impact, to be our key partner for this series. I feel very privileged to welcome and introduce Vicki Kamak and Alan Mansky to all of you. They are both recognized worldwide as social innovation leaders, as well as passionate contributors to the global family movement. They are co-founders of Plan and Plan Institute, and while both have been recognized with many awards such as the Order of Canada, they both still consider themselves to be observers, students, and guides of social innovation, scale, impact, and sustainability. Good morning, Alan and Vicki. A very warm welcome to you both. I want to thank you for leading the IMPACTAbility series and today's exciting session with Donna.
Well, thank you, Tim. You're very, very kind. And welcome, everybody, wherever you may be listening from. So nice to have all of you with us, whether you're listening to us live or to an audio recording afterwards. Vicki and I are very excited to begin our chat with today's guest, Donna Thomson, who we will introduce to you very shortly. But first, a few words about today's pattern, advocating with empathy. You know, there are a lot of urban myths about advocacy. And sadly, most people seem to take their cues from the way it used to be done. And I can assure you that 21st century advocacy is quite a bit different than 20th century advocacy. Or people watch what politicians do and emulate them, which is too bad because it leads to bad manners, lack of civility, and frankly, ineffectiveness. Advocacy for individuals or to improve public policy is a critical skill. We know that. To do it effectively, you have to pay attention to your mindset and to your discipline. So let's take the first one, mindset. At Plan, we like to work with what we call a solution-focused mindset. That means focusing on the change you want to see for your child or friend or for that particular policy. It also means not focusing on the terrible things that you think people have done before and not letting your fears get the better of you. So now let's go to discipline. The practice and process of advocacy that we like to talk about is one that focuses on relationships. Now, that doesn't mean going soft on the issue that you're advocating for, or indeed even in certain situations, it doesn't mean that you stop resisting. But it does mean that everything you do as an advocate should create the conditions for trust, respect, and mutual understanding with all the folks in the system. Trust me, you will need that throughout your career as an advocate.
When we put these two things together, discipline and mindset, we call it solution-based advocacy or relationship-based advocacy. Solution-based advocates create conditions for joint problem solving and at the same time build a stronger base for the next set of issues that have to be dealt with. For all of us in the disability world, we're part of something you might think of as the royal family of disability, and what it means is that we're in it forever. And that's why the relationships we make are so important in our lifelong journey. Our special guest today, Donna Thomson, is an exalted member of the disability royalty. She's been advocating for her son Nicholas for decades, while nurturing a loving family, writing books, and blogging. Donna's been at the forefront of the neurodiversity agenda, the Registered Disability Savings Plan, family support, and caregiver support. And from our perspective, if you are going into the labyrinth that government can sometimes be, there's no better guide and companion than Donna. So welcome, Donna. We are so delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
We thought we'd jump right in with the questions related to our title, which is about advocating with empathy. So what does that mean to you?
Well, I think that advocating with empathy means to me that when I begin to think about changing a system or a program or a service that directly affects my family, I want to deeply understand the people that I'm advocating to. I want to understand them on a personal level, and I want to understand what realities are affecting their decision-making within their constraints professionally. So I want to be, I guess, broadly speaking, their friend. That's what advocating with empathy means to me.
I love the phrase advocating to. I don't think I'd ever sort of put that together. We're always talking about advocating for something. But this idea of advocating to certainly puts that, the importance of the relationship up front. Can you give, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to, a quick segue to that. I think you begin by advocating to, but hopefully you change very quickly to advocating with.
Excellent. Yeah, great. Well said. Can you give us an example where advocating with empathy has worked in your own experience?
In my own advocacy, I think one example that I would use was finding a place for our son Nicholas to live. It was interesting because Nicholas is 28 now, and he has very, very high needs, including high medical needs. So he's one of those individuals who falls partly under the auspices of a Ministry of Health and partly under another ministry that manages social care for people with developmental disabilities. It was challenging finding a place for him to live outside of home when we could no longer support him due to my own and my husband's aging and Nicholas's desire for independence, and the level of his needs. So what I discovered was that there was actually a community partner in our city of Ottawa that had a particular willingness and a particular need for someone like Nicholas to live in their building and to work with a family to create a rich life in the community, and that would be a model that they could champion more widely. So they were interested in doing a pilot project, and I didn't know that until I began having deeper conversations with the people who were there. So at first I thought no one will want our son because his needs are so high and he had been turned down by so many places. But having conversations that were more about what are your current priorities led us to realize that their priorities and our needs were a perfect fit.
So in other words, your son Nicholas was a part of the solution.
Exactly, yeah.
That's great. Do you have an example, perhaps, of where advocating with empathy didn't work?
Yeah, it was interesting. I remember a school that I wanted Nicholas to go to. I badly wanted him to go to this particular school. It was in our neighborhood. It had an elevator in it, so it was wheelchair accessible. They already had a child with physical disabilities there, and I advocated to the people at the school, I guess under the false assumption that they did want another child with a disability, and that the experience of having that other child was a positive experience. But I was wrong on both counts. The experience that they were having with their student wasn't a positive experience, and they certainly did not want another child with disability. So when I realized that, then my advocating to that school stopped, because I realized that my empathetic inquiry had turned up answers that made Nicholas unwelcome there.
Okay. We know that you're a member of Sean Moore's Advocacy School, which for our listeners is, if you don't know of it, it really is a precious resource for the disability movement in Canada. The Advocacy School was founded by Sean Moore, who is certainly a good friend of Plan and was very helpful when we were lobbying to obtain the Registered Disability Savings Plan. And Sean taught us something called strategic inquiry, which, Donna, you've just really referenced in talking about your exploration, both related to the school that was not receptive to Nicholas's contributions and the living situation that ultimately was. Can you tell the listeners what strategic inquiry is and what its key features are?
Yes, strategic inquiry is really a carefully planned process of information gathering about all of the current realities that all of the stakeholders in your issue are working under. So strategic inquiry is not advocacy, but it is the first step in advocacy. I think strategic inquiry is asking people about themselves. So the first step in strategic inquiry would be, tell me about your organization, tell me about yourself, tell me about your current priorities. And how can I help you achieve your current priorities? So those questions may at first seem counterintuitive to someone who wants to embark on an advocacy effort, but they are actually essential to solution-based advocacy. You need to, as you said, Al and Vicki, in your introduction, strategic inquiry is the first step in relationship building, and relationships are the key to successful advocacy. So I know that, for example, there is an advocacy organization in the United States called Results that does a lot of citizen engagement and training people to do political advocacy on the anti-poverty agenda. And one of the things that the way that they explain the first steps in strategic inquiry is that you go in to speak to someone in a position of influence with respect to your issue. And the thought in your head is that you've already decided that you want to marry this person. It's a bit of a crazy analogy, but in a way it does speak to the idea that in this arranged marriage, you want to quickly go to shared interests, shared agenda, you want to develop a relationship, and you want grounds for an authentic relationship. So you're looking for shared interests, shared values, and for those very special opportunities that will reveal themselves where you can move your agenda forward.
I love that, Donna, and I'm often confessing to Vicki that when a new government is elected, or I'm meeting a new cabinet minister or school board official, etc., I often say to Vicki that I'm going to fall just a little bit in love with them. But it is it is this mindset shift that we talked about at the beginning that's so critical. And of course, when you're in a relationship, you want to be on your best behavior and you want to shine, but you also are curious about the other person. And that's where it links to strategic inquiry. I don't know how you approach it, but, and I don't think Sean has a rule per se, but generally I suggest that when you're at this stage in the journey and you're gathering information and you're trying to understand what the priorities are of that system, no matter how small it is, it has priorities, and what language they use, so that you can use some of that language, because they maybe will understand your proposal better if you dress it up in their language as opposed to trying to convince them of your language. All of that, led me to conclude that I should, as much as possible, listen 80% of the time and only broadcast 20%. I don't know what your feeling is about that, but so often we're so zealous we want to go in there and we talk and we come out without learning much.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think the number one mistake that people make in advocacy is asking for what they want immediately. And as you say, monopolizing the conversation with a long explanation of why this individual or this institution should give you what you want and what you need. That is often not a successful way of having your needs met in advocacy. And I was thinking about perhaps some of the advantages that the disability community has in advocacy generally. And one of the ideas that I had was in just reflecting on what it is that people with disabilities and their families can bring to successful advocacy generally. I think besides the fact that often we are good listeners, particularly if our sons and daughters have communication challenges, we become very good listeners. Our children are such wonderful teachers in that respect. But also, I think we bring vulnerability and which can be a powerful tool in successful advocacy and in relationship building. I think it's important to remember that we're advocating with empathy, but we're also advocating with love. And I think that the combination of a carefully engineered advocacy effort that respects people's language, people's institutional realities, pressures, combined with the strength of vulnerability and advocating for love, with love, is very powerful because it demands the best of the humanity of the people that you're advocating to and with. You rise to the occasion, and I think that people with disabilities and their families have a natural talent in that regard.
Boy, well said, Donna. That's quite a wonderful perspective, and in some ways, you're holding us to a higher standard, but it's one that we're quite capable of, and it's also very practical. Setting the table differently, as you've described, is very effective because most people don't do it. So you stand out immediately in the relationship with people in a system. But Donna, I've noticed over time, as you've told us stories, and that you, like many, many advocates, particularly parents and particularly moms, excel at hospitality, at even in these tense situations, at making people feel comfortable, at creating the conditions for trust to emerge. Can you tell us some of your tips, just on a, like on a really practical level, some of the things that you've done in the past to set the table differently?
Well, I think that one of the ways that we can set the table is by literally setting the table and inviting people to share food and drink, even if it's a coffee, bringing food. I recall that Adrienne Clarkson, our former Governor General, I remember her saying that in her citizenship ceremonies for the Institute of Canadian Citizenship, they always bring food and coffee in order to set the table for new Canadians. And so I think it's in that spirit that we want to pull the chair out for someone to sit on. We want to be a good host, and in my case, a nurturing, watchful mother in case there's anything that someone needs. If someone looks as though they're looking around for a tissue, I'll look in my purse. I must have a package of tissues in my purse. It's that kind of mindset that makes you a caregiver almost of the people that you're advocating to and with. And you don't, it's not overkill, but you want to be responsive and respectful in that regard. And, I can't say enough about inviting people to your home if you have that opportunity. That's a powerful thing to do.
I'm wondering though, Donna, is it possible to kind of go too far with some of this stuff? We've been talking about advocating with love, being a good host. All the focus is on the other person. But is solution-based advocacy, is it a soft advocacy I mean, it doesn't mean that really we shouldn't disagree or get angry. You know, is there a place for us to be assertive?
Well, I certainly think that there is a place to say this is an opportunity to strongly disagree, and say things like, it appears to me that you're not going to be able to help me. Is that right? Or, you know, these are strong declarative statements. I think what you want to do is absolutely be clear. You want to begin by assuming the best of the person that you're advocating to initially. You want to, as quickly as possible, reveal whether or not this partner has the potential to be your your co-creator in a solution for your issue. You walk away. You simply walk away, hopefully without burning any bridges, as soon as you determine that that person is not going to be your helper, your partner in advocacy. And basically, what I tell myself in those situations is, I'm speaking to the wrong person. So I do think that uncivil behavior, shouting, etc., really has no place in successful advocacy.
Okay. How do you, in so many of the relationships that we engage in as we're advocating, there's a significant power imbalance. I mean, the reality is when we're in that relationship, we're going in asking for something, or certainly hoping for something, and we're often engaged with an individual who has the power to grant it or not. How do we work with that kind of power imbalance?
I think one of the ways is really taking a lesson from your book, Vicki, and your book, Al, that you begin by assuming a place of prosperity, and that you have something important to give that the other person needs. So it's interesting because we often go into an advocacy effort consumed by need, rather than having a mindset of prosperity. I have something to give. That's the first thing that I'm thinking about. So, when I think about advocating for Nicholas, I think of all the organizations and all the services that are dedicated and designed to help people with disabilities. Well, imagine if they didn't have any people to help. So I am looking for the right fit, because there will be somebody out there who needs Nicholas. And it's interesting, I have learned that lesson over and over again in my life. And I'll just tell one quick story. When Nicholas was in elementary school, I couldn't find a school that would accept him. And every school turned him down, saying that his needs were too high. So I called the school that was at the end of our street, even though I knew that it was not wheelchair accessible and they had no children with disabilities. And I called them and I actually said, I suppose there's no way you would want my son. And the head teacher, the principal, said, want him? He's in. We need a child with a disability, because in our little school we're trying to build a microcosm of society, and we don't have a kid with a disability. We need one. And I said, well, what about the wheelchair access? And she said, that's architecture. That's only architecture. And Nicholas did go to that school, and they bought him a stair climbing machine that his chair fixed on, which was like a caterpillar thing that rode him up and down the stairs. So in the end, he had one of the best educational experiences of his life.
That's a fine example. So the abundance mindset, looking at all that we have to bring into an advocacy relationship, can take us off of our knees, can take us from a perspective of begging to offering, and your story really, really illustrates that. Thanks, Donna.
Donna, I want to switch to an issue that I see arising with regularity among individuals who are advocating for other individuals, or even for individuals who are advancing a public policy issue, and that is momentum. If somebody was to ask me what one of the most essential tactic or set of tactics in advocacy, I would say it's about maintaining momentum, even if it feels like you're going uphill constantly and that you have very little control. In fact, I think we have far more control over maintaining momentum than we realize. And so I've adopted a formula. It's not scientific, but it's based on decades of advocacy work. And here it is. Every day that I delay equals 1 week's delay in response by people inside the system. So 1 day of delay by an advocate equals a week's delay by the system. So waiting a week to answer a letter or to respond to an issue means, because that's 5 days, that's 5 weeks. So that's sort of the way I operate. And I mean, there's lots of reasons. This is not a criticism of people in the system. There's lots of reasons why it takes them longer. Big bureaucracies, including nonprofits, often have the same challenges. So whatever the reasons, though, in many ways it's up to us to keep the momentum going. I'm wondering if you've noticed this and what you have found that has been helpful to kind of get around that, to work around that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the excuse me, one of the ways that's a workaround there is by having a wide and deep network of influence. So if I'm not hearing back from someone that is in a position of power and influence, and I really want to have a conversation with that person, I go through my network to see who I know, who knows that person, and who I can get to be my ambassador. I do that all the time. I'm constantly reviewing my network to see who I could put in front of me for my issue. Who could facilitate a nudge, if that's what is required, or an introduction to somebody that I want to get to. I really, really believe in my network, and I'm constantly working at keeping my network alive, engaged, and growing. And so part of that, a key part of that, is seeing how I can help them in what they are doing. So, for example, my Twitter feed, what I'm looking for there are opportunities to be helpful to my friends and colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Gratuitously helpful so that they're there for me when I need them.
Right, right. So Donna, I want to come back to this idea of using your network, but before I do, this question of momentum, it could also include, I think, instead of responding to a letter, phoning the person up. And so you short-circuit that kind of back and forth, 5 weeks to respond to a letter, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes that works, is simply making a telephone call. Or, as you're suggesting here, keeping several conversation balls in the area. There are a range of people in a system, and if you've done your strategic inquiry right, then you know that the person you are dealing with reports to somebody else, to somebody else, to somebody else. And if you've got your network around you, you may know other people who know that person or the other person. And so it's keeping several conversation balls in the air as well. So I'm wondering if there's anything else that has triggered for you, just in terms of keeping the momentum going.
Yeah, well, you know, I think a part of the momentum, at least in the process of strategic inquiry, a lot of it is just trying to ascertain who it is who can give you, who can say yes. Who is it within an organization who has the power to give you what you want and what you need? And how can you then convince that person that giving you what you want or need is in their best interest? So that's basically what the agenda is. And then the momentum is, as you say, keeping the conversation going with in appropriate, in authentic and responsive ways, because what you don't want to do is phone repeatedly without having something new to say. So what you're looking for are opportunities to make real impact in the meeting and the phone calls that you have. So some of that is just looking at the originality of your message. Do you have new information to report or discuss? Is there something that you think might have been misunderstood in the last conversation? So I think it's important to know that advocacy has to reinvent itself every time you have a new encounter.
I want to say that's another great insight, Donna, and it speaks to your unbelievable talent as a networker. I've never seen anybody with the gift that you have. I must admit, I've seen you in rooms, or we've both been in the same room with the same people, yet somehow you've come back at the end of the evening with a fistful of business cards and follow-ups to do. And it's you've made it very clear that you consciously cultivate that wide and deep, what you called, network of influence. And so one of the ways you've talked about is by certainly cultivating it through an originality of message that you are, if you're contacting people, you're reaching out with new information. I'm wondering if there are, other tips that you have around this concept of cultivating a network. I know in our own experience, one of the things that's often helpful is asking people for advice. We may have a particular dilemma, but it's not necessarily that person's in our networks. It's not necessarily their front burning issue, but they may have advice or other contacts to make for us. are there other things that our listeners can do and we can do to cultivate our networks?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the theories of multiple identity or intersectionality, some people call it. But if I see somebody wearing a sweater that I really like, and I compliment them on it, and I say, "Where did you get that?" and we start talking about something that is completely off topic but becomes a mutual interest, whether it's knitting, shopping, being a mother, having a particular taste in music, those those kinds of connections on a human level can be quite profound. They help people to remember you, for one thing, because you've bonded on some level that is unrelated to a professional obligation. I think it's important not to minimize in advocacy those kinds of conversations and nurturing those kinds of conversations, in fact, because they help people to remember you and they help to make them into your friend.
Yeah, I've seen Al do this countless times. We'll arrive in somebody's office and he's caught out of the corner of his eye an obscure plaque or something on the wall that's referencing a history in Nova Scotia, and before you know it, they're in deep conversation about something completely unrelated to what we've come for, but have made that initial bond that you've just emphasized.
Mm.
Yeah. So I hope our listeners are getting a sense of the importance of relationships in this work. I'm sure they had it already, but often what people think is, oh, well, that's not how to do advocacy. It's got to be tactics and strategy. And in my experience, strategy and tactics come and go, and they will continue to change. And there's no one right strategy or tactic, but I can assure you that the approach of strengthening your network, building relationships is critical. I mean, that's what, in many ways, that's what PLAN is all about. It's helpful for organizations generally, and it's extremely important in advocacy. Donna, I want to return because we've got some questions from our listeners around this question. In the book, I tell the story of Adrienne Thomson, she called herself an ordinary housewife. She was one of 7 mothers in Chicago back in the late 40s, 1940s, a long time ago, who wanted to breastfeed their babies. And at that time, I think it was about 90% of the babies left hospitals being formula fed by bottles and by pablum that you buy from the grocery store. And of course today it's exactly the reverse of that. And I asked her how she did it, and she said, we never fought for anything. And I was a bit stunned by that, because they actually ended up having to call themselves La Leche League because they weren't allowed to use the word breast in newspapers or in advertising of any kind. So that's Spanish. La leche is Spanish for milk. And so she said, yeah, of course we had a lot of resistance, and we had a lot of trouble with doctors and hospital administrators and generally the media. But she said, we never fought for what we wanted. We were loving for the changes that we wanted. And so this, in many ways, you've said this throughout our time together, but because the questions are coming from our readers about that, this shift from advocating to or for to advocating with. Do you have any we're getting toward the end of our time together. Do you have any further thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, that's a beautiful quote, about the founders of the Lalesh League. I think that sometimes people feel, and I run into this in the disability parent movement, that some people feel they need to bend others to their will in order to call themselves successful advocates. And that is just simply not a recipe for success, in my opinion and in my experience. So I think there is I guess a public perception maybe that's misguided that says that we need to win a fight in order to succeed. So I think it's important, really, I guess what I'm saying is I think it's important for advocates to decide what success looks like for them before you begin, and again midway, and then evaluate at the end. Is this what success looks like for me? Because often by the end of an advocacy effort, you may have something, but it might not be what you started out wanting. So, I think it's important to know that bending people to your will and winning battles per se, and often humiliating people in the process, is not a recipe for long-term success, in my opinion. I've had far greater success by making friends and influencing people.
Yeah, and the discipline, which is why we started off our discussion today with that word discipline, the discipline to maintain this perspective, which I agree is far more successful, is harder to maintain than to do what you suggest doesn't work, which is to ridicule, to taunt, to mock, to find ways to sometimes even be critical of the character of some of the people that you're dealing with. That in many ways seems easier than to maintain this discipline. It's a very rigorous discipline required to keep one's eye on the ball. Fortunately, throughout history, we have many great examples of that. Mary, I would certainly suggest to the readers, if you want any kind of inspiration, just go on YouTube and look at videos of Adrienne Thompson. She's still alive and still going strong. She's amazing, the woman who founded Lalesh League. But Martin Luther King, he advanced issues, but from this perspective. In Burma or Myanmar today, we have Aung San Suu Kyi, inexorably moving that country toward more democracy using this discipline as well. So there are models out there, Donna.
And I think we're seeing more of this kind of thinking, even in the most recent Day of Action and the women's marches. So much of the messaging was around, bringing love into the equation. But it's not that easy to do, and it seems to me that we need additional pathways, if you will, to help us, to open us, and to stick with it. And so one of the ways that we've been thinking a lot about and talked some about is the role of arts in advocacy. And I'm wondering, Donna, because I know that you are certainly a champion of the arts, you come from a drama background, you're a dancer. What role do you see for arts and advocacy? Has it ever been part of some of the strategy that you've used? Where have you seen it work?
Well, I've certainly seen it work in the visual arts and in theater, particularly in some of the theater work that I really love, that's in broadly under the umbrella of contemporary theater. There's a project that I really loved in Scotland called Private Dancer, where people with developmental disabilities were trained as dancers, and behind screens would perform privately for one person. And I think in a way this is a little bit subversive in creating opportunities for people to be intimate with one another. People who would never normally know each other. And of course they brought in policymakers to have an individual private dance. And sometimes the dancers refused to dance if they didn't like the person who was sitting in front of them. You know, it's very interesting. I believe that we can harness the arts as a very effective policy and advocacy tool, because often they are relationship building tools, and it cuts to the quick. You know, no more waiting 5 days for a response. You go right to the heart of relationships using the arts. So I've seen the arts be very effective in creating relationships between people who might otherwise have trouble understanding each other.
Thanks, Donna. We are getting close to the end of this conversation, and we'll flip it back to Tim. Just wanted to, we're not going to have time to handle a question that's just come in from one of our listeners around essentially her or she or he feeling that they're in a silo with regard to their adult son or daughter with a mental illness. And so I just want to, by way of summary, say that what we've been talking about today is not letting yourself stay in that silo. And so it's building a team, a network, a team of champions, as you've described, Donna, around yourself, and then gradually included in that team or network are people from within the system, and just working that way. Now, I know that's not a quick answer to it, but this is indispensable for making sure that we don't stay siloed in our advocacy. Donna, I'm going to pass it back to Tim, who I know will thank you, but on behalf of Vicki and I, thank you.
Yeah, you know, a huge thank you again to Al, Vicki, and Donna for sharing your rich insights, learnings, and perspectives with us. While we're getting close to the time to bring the webinar to a close, I'd be interested in Al and Vicki's thoughts and or reflections around one thing from today's discussion, and that really is, because Donna shared so much with us, is around this concept of advocating with love and thinking maybe larger than yourself or the person you're advocating with, and maybe taking some of the energy out of the advocacy that you're trying to do.
Yeah, for me, the term that I'm really walking away with is this idea of a network of influence. And, you know, we create networks through relationships, through love, through connection, but being very strategic about it and creating that network of influence to help us, give us advice and to move things forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because one of the things we like to say at PLAN is our acronym for LOVE is Leaders Offer Value Every Day, and just thinking about coming that from a more strategic place. So thank you so much, Al and Vicki. I mean, this webinar series would not have been possible without the support for some really amazing partners who are on your screen now. These partners, along with the teams at Plan and Plant Institute and Tamarack Institute, are making an impact every day, both for communities and individuals across Canada and beyond. We invite and look forward to your presence at the next webinar, which will be on Tuesday, February 7th at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. And this will be our final webinar in this series. The pattern for the next discussion will be Think and Act Like a Movement with special guest Alexandra Samuel, and you don't want to miss this final one. We want to remind you that you'll need to register for this last webinar to receive a link to join in. If you've not already done so, please go online and register for our final session at the link that is on your screen. If you missed any previous webinars in the series, a reminder that all recordings are available on YouTube. The link is on your screen now. We have more exciting events and resources available. Please visit our website at planinstitute.ca or rdsp.com to learn more and sign up for our monthly-based email newsletter. As well, please visit our partner Tamarack Institute's website, who organize and host many community building programs and workshops across Canada. There are 2 events coming up that may be of interest. If you happen to be in Vancouver, you can register now to join Tamarack this March for a 3-day event on community engagement. In April, the city's Reducing Poverty event will be held in Hamilton, Ontario. Later this week, we'll be sending you an email with links to the audio and other material related to today's webinar, including a discount code to purchase your own copy of Impact. As always, we welcome your feedback, so please do email us to let us know how we're doing. And last but certainly not least, as we bring this session to a close, we would like to thank everyone for joining us on this webinar. Your comments and questions help to make this a dynamic and thought-provoking conversation today. And so until next time, we wish all of you well.